The security war room was already tense before the protests reached the front steps. The Chief Information Security Officer, CISO, had 3 screens open, and none of them agreed on what was actually happening. Outside, crowds were forming near the headquarters. Inside, a payment application programming interface, API, was flapping in and out of service. On social platforms, a hashtag accusing the company of complicity was climbing the trends list, powered by partial screenshots and a leaked internal slide deck. The board wanted a clean answer. Was this a distributed denial of service, DDoS attack, a bad change, or something bigger? They also wanted to know whether pulling systems offline would calm things down or make everything explode.
Welcome to the Wednesday headline feature from Bare Metal Cyber Magazine, developed by Bare Metal Cyber. In this episode, we explore what happens when protests, outages, and digital pressure stop being separate lanes of risk and start reinforcing each other. Over the next few years, this hybrid pattern will not be an edge case. It will be part of normal operating conditions for organizations that touch money.
A useful way to begin is with the bridge between the street and the network. Modern protests almost always spill into digital space. A march outside an office or data center is quickly paired with calls to expose executives, to publish internal documents, and to overwhelm customer-facing channels. Videos and photos that appear on news feeds become raw material for narratives that travel globally within minutes. Those narratives are often attached to specific targets, such as login pages, feedback forms, or employee profiles, and call on people to hit those points in whatever way they can. Some participants are activists, some are opportunists, and some are outright criminals. But from your side of the dashboard, the result is a surge of stress on people and systems at the same time.
If you have lived through one of these moments, the pattern is familiar. Social listening tools light up. Legal and communications teams start asking about defamation, privacy, and the boundaries of acceptable speech. A boycott list begins circulating, with your brand in the middle. In parallel, you see odd spikes in traffic from new geographies, or login attempts that do not match your usual user behavior. Your marketing site, blog, and support channels become targets for defacement and abuse. The majority of that traffic may still be legitimate users expressing anger, demanding answers, or organizing campaigns. Mixed into that noise are people attempting real harm, from credential stuffing to data leaks. The difficulty is that, in real time, those streams blur together.
This is where leadership judgment becomes more important than any specific tool. If security treats every expression of anger as hostile, the organization may overreact, locking down channels, cutting off access, and confirming the narrative that it is hiding something. If security underreacts, determined attackers can hide serious operations within the chaos. A better framing is to treat protests and online pressure as amplifiers of stress, not as cyber incidents in themselves. They are predictable sources of additional load on services, people, and decision processes. When you adopt that framing, you can start deciding in advance what you will protect, what you will tolerate, and how you will distinguish harm to systems from harm to people when you cannot eliminate both.
The next layer of complexity comes when systems fail. During hybrid events, everyone wants a simple answer to the question of why services went down. Was it an attacker using a DDoS campaign to knock you offline? Was it a rushed internal change that broke a key dependency? Was it an upstream provider making a policy decision or responding to regulatory pressure? To the public, customers, and many employees, those distinctions are invisible. All they experience is the fact that access was cut at a highly charged moment, and they draw their own conclusions about intent. That ambiguity is exactly why outages have become such attractive leverage in social and political conflicts.
From an operational point of view, you need a different set of distinctions. If you are dealing with hostile activity against your own systems, you may need to coordinate with upstream cloud providers, law enforcement, or industry peers while you filter, rate limit, and recover. If the outage was effectively self-inflicted by an internal control change, you need to own the decision. Fix the fragility, and be honest about what went wrong so you do not repeat it in the next crisis. If the disruption was the result of a policy choice, whether by your organization, a platform you depend on, or a regulator, then suddenly security leaders find themselves in the middle of discussions about ethics, legal exposure, and public positioning. Those conversations often matter more than packet traces.
Outage decisions are also read as signals, whether you intend that or not. Taking a payment system offline may reduce short-term fraud risk, but it can also look like punishment directed at a community or region. Accepting degraded service around a protest zone might protect staff safety, but could be interpreted as discrimination. Insisting on full availability in the name of transparency might expose your employees to doxing and harassment you are not equipped to manage. In a hybrid context, almost every availability choice becomes a political statement. Leaders who understand outages as leverage, not just as incidents, begin to design for graceful degradation, clear communication, and documented criteria for pulling plugs. That way, when they act, it feels like a principled posture rather than a panicked reaction.
As hybrid pressure grows, it rarely stops at surface-level websites or brand assets. Campaigns increasingly reach back into shared infrastructure. Payment networks, logistics platforms, collaboration suites, identity providers, and content delivery networks become pressure points because many organizations depend on them and cannot easily switch away. Some are targeted directly with ransomware, DDoS attacks, or exploitation of known weaknesses. Others are influenced indirectly as their abuse processes, app store policies, or trust frameworks become tools in wider conflicts. A decision by one platform to suspend a service, revoke a certificate, or disable an app can have ripple effects across hundreds of downstream customers. Adversaries understand the asymmetry in this landscape. They time ransomware or data leak campaigns to coincide with elections, strikes, or mass demonstrations, knowing that defenders are already distracted and that public pressure will be high. They focus on nodes that are hard to replace quickly, such as sector-specific software as a service, SaaS, regional cloud facilities with strict data residency requirements, or identity brokers whose trust relationships underpin access across many organizations. The result is that even if your own perimeter is strong, you can still be drawn into a hybrid event because a provider or partner becomes the theater in which the campaign plays out.
Many organizations are still not thinking this way. Their risk models stop at the edge of their own environment or at the contractual boundary with a major vendor. They have not asked which of their cloud regions might be politically exposed, which logistics or payment partners are likely to become targets during social unrest, or what would happen if a widely used communications platform became unreliable in one geography. When a provider experiences business-as-usual turbulence during a protest cycle, these organizations are left improvising under pressure. Leaders who build a richer dependency map, including social and political stress factors, have more options. They can plan for substitution, build alternative channels, and decide in advance which dependencies they are willing to accept as single points of hybrid failure.
All of this complexity lands on governance. Hybrid events expose every unresolved ownership gap in an organization. In calm times, the blurry overlap between cyber, physical security, legal, human resources, and communications teams is inconvenient but survivable. In a crisis, that fuzziness becomes a force multiplier for chaos. Someone has to decide whether offices in a protest zone move to remote work, whether badge access is restricted, whether certain digital services are throttled or switched off, and how data will be handled if regulators, law enforcement, or civil litigants come calling. If those decision rights are not clear before the crisis, they will be claimed in the moment by whoever happens to be loudest or closest to the executives. Different functions also hold different definitions of harm. Physical security focuses on the immediate safety of staff and facilities. Legal concentrates on regulatory obligations, liability, and future discovery. Communications cares about narrative control and trust with the public. Operations watches the health of core services and the cost of downtime.
Security worries about attackers exploiting distraction and about long-term erosion of confidence in the brand. During hybrid events, all of these concerns are legitimate, but they cannot all dominate at once. Without a prior agreement on who gets to make which calls at which thresholds, every action becomes a negotiation. Those negotiations consume time and attention you do not have, and they often produce visible contradictions. Some of the most damaging outcomes in hybrid scenarios are not the initial decisions, but the inconsistent ones that follow. A company might publicly commit to keeping certain channels open, then quietly restrict them when things become uncomfortable. It might promise employees strong support against harassment, then fail to act when senior leaders are targeted. It might declare neutrality, then comply with opaque requests it is not prepared to explain. Customers and staff see these shifts, and they remember them long after the systems are stable again. Treating ownership as a central governance problem rather than a set of ad hoc crisis moves allows leadership teams to define ahead of time who decides, what values guide those decisions, and how they will be documented and communicated.
Designing for hybrid resilience lives at the intersection of architecture and governance. You cannot engineer your way out of politics, but you can design systems so that when social and technical stress collide, the damage is contained and your choices are explainable. This starts with rejecting all-or-nothing thinking about availability. Instead of a binary choice between full service and total shutdown, you need clearly defined modes where specific features are restricted, additional checks are applied in certain regions, or high-risk actions are slowed down. These modes should be technically feasible, auditable, and tied to decision criteria that leadership understands.
At the system level, familiar resilience patterns take on new roles. Segmentation is not only about limiting lateral movement for attackers, it is also about isolating functions that could become flashpoints, such as payment flows associated with contentious activities, or datasets likely to be the subject of urgent demands. Alternative communications channels are as important as redundant compute. If your primary collaboration tool is blocked or overloaded, can your executives and incident teams still coordinate safely? If your main login journey becomes a target for abuse or protest action, is there a backup path for customers that does not introduce fresh security holes or privacy risks? Questions like these turn abstract resilience talk into specific design work.
On top of the architecture, you need playbooks that treat hybrid stress as a normal scenario rather than a special case. A good playbook does more than list steps. It describes what graceful degradation looks like for key services, which levers can be pulled without executive sign-off, and which changes require explicit approval from the board or a designated crisis committee. It also defines how you will log and record those decisions, so you can explain them later to regulators, auditors, courts, or your own staff. Some of the most important entries in that playbook describe the actions you will not take, even under pressure, because they would cause long-term damage to trust. At that point, resilience becomes as much about values as about uptime.
All of this sits inside a wider, politicized network. Organizations operate at junctions where many sources of power meet: boards, regulators, employees, customers, platforms, activists, and states. During quiet periods, everyone can maintain comfortable ambiguity about expectations. During unrest, that ambiguity collapses. You will be asked to choose whether to act as neutral infrastructure, as an ally to one side, or as a cautious bystander. Those choices show up in decisions about who is allowed to register, whose content is blocked or amplified, whose data is retained, and which jurisdictions you treat as priority. Saying these are purely technical or purely legal decisions is increasingly unconvincing.
For security and technology leaders, this means stretching the usual conversation about risk appetite into a broader conversation about posture. You need to know whether the organization is prepared to be seen as neutral, even when neutrality means facilitating actions some stakeholders dislike.
You need clarity on how far you will go to comply with lawful but controversial orders, and where you are willing to accept higher operational or legal risk to protect employees or vulnerable communities. These are not questions to push to the bottom of an incident agenda. They belong in board discussions, strategy offsites, and leadership development programs. When the pressure arrives, everyone should already know which principles apply.
Culture is where those principles either take root or fade away. Engineers and analysts are more likely to raise concerns early if they believe leadership will support them when they say no to unsafe demands. Employees are less likely to leak or actively resist if they believe the organization will try to act consistently with its stated values, even when it hurts. Partners and customers will treat you differently if they see you as opportunistic, saying one thing when times are calm and doing another when protests or political pressure escalate. Leading in a politicized network therefore means treating security, resilience, and trust as facets of the same posture, not separate work streams.
At its core, this is a shift in mental model. Instead of asking whether you will be attacked, the more useful question is how your organization behaves when hybrid pressure arrives and different kinds of harm collide. The scene we began with, a leadership team trying to decide whether a flapping API, a trending hashtag, and a protest at the front door belong to one story or three, is not going away. What can change is how ready you are for that moment. If you have already mapped how protests bleed into digital harassment, how outages become leverage, how infrastructure becomes a pressure point, and how ownership will work when everything is loud at once, you will see patterns instead of chaos.
Internalizing this way of thinking changes the conversations you bring to your executives, your board, and your teams. It encourages questions like, which trade-offs are we prepared to explain publicly under pressure? And which dependencies are we willing to have fail in messy ways, rather than can we prevent this from ever happening? Hybrid threats will continue to test the promises organizations make about safety, access, and neutrality. The leaders who do best will be those who treat those tests as design inputs, not surprises. They will have built architectures, playbooks, and governance arrangements that can hold their shape when the network around them starts to shake.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.